Did you catch the video by Ivan Hall and Damar Jackson on their podcast where they talk about Rachel being a red flag for canceling a group date? Wow, it's 2022. I can't believe we're at this point. And Ivan isn't the only one either. Everyone from Nick Viall said that Rachel is kind of like Clayton, only thinking about herself. She's being quite selfish. But there's a lot to unpack here. Join me in this video where I go over what is actually a red flag and what we can learn. Make sure to subscribe to my page. Welcome to Reality TV Therapy with me, Dr. Diane. Every once in a while, an opportunity like this in Bachelor Nation presents itself where I get to educate people to understand more what we're observing, what the heck is happening, and to inform people about something that I call attachment styles. Like what's really happening with Rachel. If you know me, you know I have a lot to say. And if you don't know me, I'm Dr. Diane Strakowski. I'm the Back to Love doc. I'm a licensed psychologist, relationship expert, and couples therapist. My specialty is working with attachment issues with singles and couples. And in my free time, I recap popular dating shows like The Bachelorette. Because there's so much we can learn about dating and relationships, from what not to do and what to do. But let's dive into today's topic about what Ivan said about Rachel being a red flag. Let's watch.
Me, dare I say, is it a red flag? All these ups, like Rachel is roller coaster ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. Sweet girl, all that stuff. That's almost a red flag at this point. Like these guys, they have to be like, when Jesse comes up to them and is like, hey, the group date is canceled because some stuff happened and Rachel wanted to cancel.
And even Damar is scratching his head. Wow, are we going there? But as a psychologist and as a woman, what's hard for me to watch is men judging a woman's emotional reactions. I know a lot of women, this is their biggest nightmare. Gabby said the same thing. To be considered too much, too emotional. It reinforces the stereotype that women should be easygoing. We should suppress these things. I'm going to give Ivan and Damar the benefit of the doubt. They're not psychologists. They don't know what to make of this either. So I'm here to help you digest it. But for me, and he said, but Ivan said for him, this would be a red flag. It's an important qualification. I'll come back to that. But this day and age, in the same franchise that praises men for being vulnerable, I want to be very careful we don't slam women and call them red flags for being emotional. Now, when it comes to the public, I've seen all these mixed reviews. It's been a couple days, there's been some splits. Some people will agree, maybe it's too much. And remember, as the viewers, we're seeing only one viewpoint. We're seeing an emotional woman, which is hard to manage, who's crying most every session. And we just want it to stop. But 80% of the people, my followers, say Ivan was a little bit too harsh here. And that's why I want to go over this. Now, as the video even goes on, we see Ivan saying that Tino calls out Rachel as a red flag. I don't think that was Tino's cover of it at all. I don't think Tino was explaining that Rachel was a red flag as much as saying, I have an emotional reaction. And I actually think Tino's response was right on the money. But let's define what is a red flag and what isn't. Because there are a ton of memes out there about, oh, red flags, it's pineapple on your pizza. Red flag if somebody doesn't drink coffee. But in relationships, red flags are cautionary signs, right? The stormy seas that you shouldn't go into. That's why we have red flag warnings. But what are red flags? What about untreated drug use? Is that a red flag? Yeah, could be. Somebody having anger problems. Is that a red flag? Could be. Lying, cheating, are those red flags? Yes, those are red flags because it speaks to someone's character, that they could be dangerous. I could get hurt by being in a relationship with you. But is canceling a group date a red flag? No! I think no. So, if it's not a red flag, then what is it? I want to explain that so much of these behaviors we can explain by understanding something called attachment theory. Have you heard of it? Maybe you've heard of this book called Attached. I highly recommend it But in all my other videos, and if you follow me on Instagram, you know that this is my topic of interest because it helps more than any other theory to explain why people do the things that they do and why do they need certain things. Let me describe briefly. Attachment theory, been around for centuries, decades. Started by John Bowlby, the founder of the theory. He was a scientist. He studied this. We have laboratory settings that confirm this concept. But the concept is that love is not one size fits all, and that we all love, and we're in romantic relationships, how we first experience love through our parents. The concept goes that you develop your attachment style, whether you're secure, anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, or fearful avoidant, the 4 different types, as a child. And that this pattern or theme is consistent from what Dr. Bowlby says from cradle to grave. Now, that sounds a little bit daunting and that can be negative, but that's not always the case. We're always moving from an insecure place to more security. And it's possible to earn your security going to therapy or being with the right partner. Now, again, there is scientific evidence to this. No other theory has been more well documented or studied. And as a therapist myself, it informs everything that I do. Now, what's fascinating is I want to bring in some facts here. I want to bring in some numbers because the original research, Dr. Bowlby's work and Dr. Ainsworth, who followed him, said that 50% of the population was insecure, meaning 50% were secure. I don't know about you, but do you think that 50% of the population is secure? I didn't think so either. So I created my own love style quiz, and at this point I have data from 70,000 people who agree with what I think is that the majority of people are insecure. My data says that 68% of people are insecure. Are we going to call 68% of the population red flags? That sounds too much. Now, you develop your attachment style from your parent by the time you're 2, and then this pattern is how you cope during stress in particular. This is the key point. I want you to remember this. It's like we are all like tea. You don't know someone's strength or their flavor until you put them in hot water. And here, this is what we're studying. We're looking at how someone responds in stress. And Rachel, let's face it, she's in a stressful situation. It may not be stressful for some people, but for her, it certainly is. Now, let's look at the breakdown of this. With the 70,000 people that I've had, I want to talk about the majority of people. The majority of people have an anxious, ambivalent attachment style. I call this a nervous style. Nervous Nora or Nick. I have characters. It's because your nervous system is wired to be highly sensitive and attuned to things. Sounds familiar? The next, and 43%, I say, are anxious. For women, 45% of women, the highest amount, have an anxious attachment style, just like Rachel. 31% of men have this style. Who comes next? The avoidant person. We all know these guys, the kind of bad boy guys. Avoidant, 20% of the population. Men, 22% of men are this independent avoidant type, 19% of women. Then there's the fearful avoidant type, 5% of the population in general, 6% of women and 4% of men. Thank goodness, not as common. They've suffered abuse, neglect. And then who are the people you want to be? The role models of the world. 32% secure total, 30% women, 42% men. Only because I think men answer my quiz slightly differently. But if you're going to wait to find somebody who's secure, good luck to you then, because that's only 32% of the population. Now, how does one become anxious or avoidant or fearful avoidant? Back to childhood. If you had parents who were there for you sometimes, but not others, you learn to mistrust people a little bit. Does this sound familiar? And that's what happens when there's inconsistencies in the parenting. You can develop an anxious attachment style. What does that mean? That means that you're scanning the environment to see, are you here for me this time? Are you here for me that time? And people who have an anxious attachment style, they fall in love easily. They lead with their heart. They wear their heart on their sleeve. They are kind people too, but they can be people pleasers. They can be incredibly accommodating. Now, to call them selfish is the problem that I have. This isn't selfish in a narcissistic way, but but certainly it's in a way that I've got to take care of myself because I don't know if I can trust you. And the sensitivity point here is the feeling of being rejected or abandoned easily. Sounds pretty common, doesn't it? So it's unfair to say that the person is selfish because partly they're thinking of everybody else and they're giving people too much credit to affect them, not able to take control. But that's what's really happening with Rachel. It's not that it's a red flag that she has emotions. She doesn't know how to cope. Okay, now, how do I know this? Well, because I mentioned I've been a psychologist for 20 years, but I, in all transparency, want to say that I've had an anxious attachment style too. And for many people, it goes unknown. You've maybe never heard of the concept. It's now my life's work to educate people what this is. But when I was single, and I got married later in life, and I dated a ton, I went to 7 different therapists, and not a single one said to me, Diane, I think you have an anxious attachment style. If I had known that, things would have been so different because I wouldn't have taken things so personally, and I would have then started to think about how to treat my anxiety. In therapy, we call it you have to name it to tame it. And if you don't know what to name it, you're going to call it a red flag. But here's where it gets interesting because I gave you the stats. Most women are anxious, some are secure, some are avoidant. The same thing applies for men. But here is the mistake, and it's a common mistake. Again, I'm giving Ivan and Damar lots of leeway here. The mistake that people make is something called the golden rule. And here's the golden rule.
A common relationship mistake. You use the golden rule. Do unto others the way you would like to be done unto. I would text him back immediately. Why doesn't he? Because he's not you.
Yeah, do unto others the way you would like to be done unto. But here's the thing, everyone's not you. And because you've had your attachment style for your entire life, you're using yourself as your reference for how you think about it. So anyone else who maybe grew up in a more self-sufficient, avoidant family will say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, put on your big girl panties. But that's very hard for someone like Rachel to do. And nobody just says, oh, great. It's like, calm down. Great, thank you. It doesn't work that way. So let me give you something that is going to be better than the golden rule, and it's the platinum rule.
Instead, do unto your partner the way they would like to be done unto. It's called the platinum rule.
If you're in a relationship or you're trying to learn or you're trying to date, this is going to save you so much. This is free therapy. The platinum rule says do unto your partner the way they need to be done unto, not the way I think they should be done unto. Because if I'm an avoidant person, and for a moment I'm going to stop and say, maybe Ivan, who came at this, said, for me this would be a red flag. For him, we are reacting and responding to other people all the time, and that's what dating is, figuring out who's a fit for it or who isn't. But for Ivan, say he's an avoidant type, grew up self-sufficient, family didn't have a ton of emotional expression, everybody did their own thing, then I meet someone like you and you're coming at me with a lot of emotion and or you're crying and it evokes a response from me and I say, whoa, too much. It's not technically that you're too much, it's too much for them. So if you use the platinum rule then you understand I don't have to be so afraid of this conflict. I need to just hold space for you and say that your response is one way, I might handle it a different way. But let's not judge. So that makes a lot of sense. Use the platinum rule instead, because we don't want to be judging other people for what they're doing. They're having an emotional response. Here's the thing that happens, and this is so common in couples, that one partner is avoidant and the other is anxious. Why? Because there's a synergy there that happens. So the anxious person is attracted to someone who's a little bit more cool because two anxious people sometimes feels too much. But what happens then is something called the abandonment shame spiral. So the anxious person feels like they're being abandoned, rejected. They reach out. They need more contact because my needs are, I need to feel seen, validated. But the avoidant person gets flooded by this. What do they need? They need space, distance, respect. So we've got a cycle here of a push and pull, and that replicates itself. These are also the most common couples, and they're the ones that I treat in couples therapy. Now, the second part of my video is about Nick Viall, and his feedback was that Rachel is more like Clayton. Nick said,
Making the same mistake Clayton made. Clayton made the mistake of taking being the Bachelor too literally, in the sense that if you're the lead, it's just like you feel like you're kind of, you know, not the equal of the people you're trying to fall in love with. Clayton made the mistake of focusing on his love story and not thinking about, like, my love story is only matters as it relates to the people I'm trying to fall in love with, and like they're my equal. And so like Clayton's is more like, no, I'm the Bachelor. I get to sleep with whoever I want. I can say who I love you to whoever I want in the moment. I'm just in the moment. And I feel like for different reasons, Rachel the same way is just like, I'm the Bachelorette. No one cannot like me the most.
I will have to agree with Nick on this point, because Rachel, and a lot like Clayton, was plucked right from her season. Went right from being on the show into her season. And remember, production is in their ear saying, you're the Bachelorette, this is your journey. And then she's thrown in this untenable situation with a good friend of hers, Gabby. I'll call her her best friend. And they both are sharing the same men. We've never seen this before, but think of the stress and think how that is going to affect her. But is she being selfish? I don't think so. Now, and is she being similar to Clayton? Well, Clayton said, I'm in love with 3 women and I'm going to let them know it. I haven't seen that from Rachel just yet. That doesn't seem to be Rachel's story. But there is a self-absorption that comes, and I do believe that both Clayton and Rachel had an anxious attachment style, connected quickly. But here's the difference. Rachel is very aware. She's immediately apologetic. She says to the men, I'm so sorry I canceled the date. She is aware of her behavior and how it affects other people. And while people are negatively coming at Rachel, there's things that she's doing really well. And so are Gabby. They're getting rid of people quickly. They found out about Chris, boom, he was gone. Rachel got rid of Jordan V. And lots of people came down hard on her, saying, oh, she didn't give him a chance. But she has to make bold moves. And so we're presenting only one side of her as being this wounded person, when I don't think that's fair. And my gosh, people are overgeneralizing, saying, well, I wouldn't trust her as a pilot because she's anxious on the show. So unfair. I want to say we've got to stop this. Now, if this were you and you're identifying with Rachel, as I know I could at some point when I was single, what can you do? This is a beautiful point. Well, one, you can give your partner the benefit of the doubt, use the platinum rule, but there are 4 steps that you can move towards security. One, you have to calm your body, because your body is giving you signals, this nervous system that's hypersensitive, that you are in a threatening situation. You have to calm your body, counteract that, because if I'm relaxed in my body, I don't feel so aroused. 2, you have to work on your inner child. You have to be there for yourself and reparent yourself by coaching yourself, by saying, I'm fine. Focus on the guys who are there for me. Which brings me to number 3. You have to work on your cognitions, your negative thoughts. Rachel is saying to herself, I've been dealt some tough cards. I'm humiliated. And those words carry weight, and then we feel a certain way because of how we think. If we want to feel differently, we have to think differently. And finally, I would agree, it would have been better if Rachel didn't cancel the date, because she would have an opportunity to interact and have some positivity, and if she could have acted with confidence. She's going to look back at this and probably wish she had done it differently too. But we can't snap our fingers and ask Rachel to suddenly become secure, because it doesn't work like that. Let's talk about where you're going to move. If this is you, earn security. What does that look like? It looks like the work of therapy, where you do those 4 steps repeatedly. I help people do that. But then if you can get into a secure, functioning relationship with someone, they don't have to be perfect either, because 68% of people are insecure. But then you settle into that relationship, and now you have what are called corrective experiences. In childhood, you had experiences where you couldn't trust your adult parents. Are they going to be there for me? Are they not? Am I all alone? Now we need to have positive experiences. And that's how people grow. They don't grow in an 8-week TV show. They grow with having good relationships. Now, to summarize this, I also don't think that Logan is terribly bad. Watch my last video for that. because he did at some point say that he needed to share this information sooner. At the end of all of my videos, I like to do what I call a reality check, which is looking in the mirror and what can we learn from this. What we can learn is that Rachel is not a red flag. It is your attachment style that causes you to respond to certain situations, particularly stressful ones, in a different way. Now, your attachment style is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to work on healing yourself. And it's not an excuse either. It's rather a description of why people do what they do. They're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to regulate themselves. But we have to show compassion. Compassion for people. Say the avoidant person needs time to themselves. I wouldn't judge that any differently than I would judge an emotional person needing some time to themselves or needing some validation or assurance. And finally, I want to say, I think that we have to be careful unless you've ever been in this position. And I agree with Caitlin Bristow on this. It's not for anyone else who hasn't been the lead to comment on it because they are in hot water. It's a terribly difficult situation. But I'm thinking of Rachel. I'm watching this back. I want, of course, the best for her. And she will get to that. But we have to be patient. And in the meantime, think about it. We want to have compassion for all those people. Because sure, you can say, oh, I'm never going to date an emotional person again. I'm never going to date an avoidant. But they're out there. Now, finally, I'm going to make an invitation to Ivan and Damar. If you want to understand more information, have me on your podcast. I'd love to share more information about that. But let's be very careful of the terms that we use so people feel that they're understood. Thank you.